Okay, evening everybody. I hate these things. We'll warm into it as we go. For those of you who don't know me, normally I'm a bit like Ken Dodd, as in I could talk to you till midnight. We'll lock the doors and then I'd let you go. But tonight we're gonna have to push on a little bit. I'll try and keep it to 40 minutes. So we've got lots of time for questions at the end. Yeah, it's a real popular subject, the multi-species leys, has been for the last 4 or 5 years. Increasing questions about it, you know, should we be doing it, should we not? An awful lot of positive press. I just wanted to stir the pot a little bit as normal and say it's not all good news. There are things we need to be aware of before we make the leap. Yeah, have a listen for a few minutes and hopefully I'll convert you all that there is a genuine opportunity to use some of these multi-species leys on every farm in Wales. Okay, the plan really, I'm just going to run through what we class as multi-species leys, exactly what they are, run through the main benefits and some of the pitfalls that we have in multi-species leys, and then a little review. As Alan says, I've got involved with a few projects, both on the demo farms and as part of the innovation projects. So I'll run through some of the actual on-farm experiences and some of the practical considerations for both establishing and managing the leys. And I say, we're going to rattle through this. It's going to be 40 minutes-ish, Alan, with man with a clock. Right. Okay, so multi-species leys. What are they? Well, basically, it is what it says on the tin. It's swards that contain a variety of grasses, herbs, and legumes and flowering plants as a departure from the normal, as we'd expect, either ryegrass or grass and clover, real simple mixtures. They get called multi-species leys. Sometimes they're referred to as diverse leys, herbal leys. We see it as alternative leys. What they are not is wildflower mixtures. They're a different fellow altogether. So with the multi-species leys, we are talking about one of the key targets being production, whereas obviously in a wildflower mixture, that production element is way down the list. So they're a different beast altogether, and I'm not going to go there tonight. And then I say they're nothing new. Most of you think you've probably got a multi-species ley. This is one of my fields at home, lots of clover. 3 different types. There's white clover, there's red clover, there's bushfoot, trefoil, there's a legume in there. There's some weeds, there's some ryegrass, there's a bit of everything. It's multi-species, isn't it? Well, it's multi-species that has developed because lower inputs, so the ryegrass has dropped off and there's space in that sward for other plants to come join the party. So within that diversity, you know, there's lots of little niches, and this changes year on year. Some things dominate one year and less dominant next year. But yeah, it is a multi-species sward. But really, it's what we would term a diverse natural sward. So there's not a heap of sown species in there. It's what developed over time. And certainly the yields and the quality in this ley aren't anywhere near what a modern sown multi-species ley would be. And these diverse swards, okay, they have a purpose on farm. So my cattle graze and during the summer. They're, you know, you have to consider what animals are getting, because I'm not getting high energy levels, we're not getting high protein levels, but for certain times of the year, for certain classes of stock, they're really valuable. But say these are what we would term natural diverse pastures. Okay, but many pastures don't turn into this pretty stuff. The picture on the left, that's a multi-species ley. Look, I've got docks, I've got meadowgrass, I've got a bit of ryegrass, a bit of clover, some buttercups and some Yorkshire fog. It's not providing much in terms of botanical diversity, habitat value. You know, it's doing absolutely nothing, even though it's got several species in it. The picture on the left, I don't know if Charlie's with us tonight, but this is a picture from Bronneth, one of Charlie's experiments back in the 90s, and it's the low input system looking at what happens to swards when we remove chemical inputs, lime, P&K, nitrogen. And does it turn pretty? Do we get a lovely multi-species sward? No, we get lots of thistles and we get lots of undesirable species in the short term. Unfortunately, as a long-term experiment, it never ran long enough to see ultimately what develops, whether we go through a phase of the nasty stuff before we get to diversity. But this is the problem with having multi-species leys that aren't sown, is that they just lack the energy and the protein and the production levels. Now, multi-species leys are nothing new. For the last 200 years, we've had people banging on about the benefits of diversity. Mainly they've been targeted animal health, so lots of medicinal properties in some of these herbs that would help animal performance as well as maintain low worm burdens. There has always been arguments for a seasonality of growth, so that as the grass growth curve starts to dip during the summer and sort of July time, some of the other species would fill that forage gap, so the clovers would kick in. So we have this seasonality of growth. There's also some species that will give us slightly earlier season growth and slightly later season growth. Drought, don't head too far east. I don't know why I'm talking about drought tolerance. You should see the state of this place. In West Wales, it's done nothing but rain for the last 6 weeks. I'm looking at multi-species leys with rice and watercress. I think we're getting that far. But anyway, drought tolerance, if we head east, certainly a lot of these species will be deeper rooted and have a tolerance to survive a 4, a 6, and 8 week drought. Obviously, the legumes, nitrogen fixers, so we can reduce our artificial fertilizer inputs. There have been many claims that certainly if we've got above ground diversity, I've also got our diversity below ground. So I've got a whole range of bacteria and fungal associations that go with my broad range of species. And I've got a range of different rooting depths and root structures. So it improves my soil health, drainage, nutrient cycling, the whole lot. Now, these sort of claims and descriptions of multi-species leys have been around, I say, for a couple of centuries. In the last few years, we've added on a few more. So we've now started to see, hang on a minute, we've got issues here with organic matter. And can we associate this deeper rooting fraction of a multi-species ley with increased soil organic matter, with increased carbon sequestration? Can it help alleviate some of the climate change issues? Will it help in flood alleviation? And certainly biodiversity, and very much recently the pollinator side of things has come to the fore. So the role of having something that isn't just ryegrass and clover and broaden out can have this whole range of benefits. Now, there's a lovely article on Farmer Connect website that talks about all these benefits. It's a bit one-sided because there's also a lot of claims that actually, if I've got a multi-species leys, I'm probably never going to top the yield and the quality of a prime new ryegrass sward. So the picture on the right is one of the BGS grass management winners from several years back, averaging 15 tonne of dry matter across the whole farm, and it's 90% ryegrass with a bit of white clover. And this guy grows 14, 15 tonne of dry matter every year. It's reliable. His cows go out on 15th of February to grass. They last 10 or 12 years. He can tightly stock. He would argue it's reliable. So we've got the two schools of thought. Is there scope for multi-species, or should we, have the reliability within ryegrass? That's the argument for tonight. Okay, so to try and counter this argument that, well, these naturally diverse swards aren't that high in yield, aren't that high in quality, we've been developing seed mixtures to produce multi-species leys that have comparable yields and certainly decent quality levels that compare very well with a ryegrass clover ley. And it all started way back. Let's go back to, you've probably all heard of the Cockle Park mixtures. So we're going back on a trial that started late, just before the turn of the century, 1890 something. And they developed a series of mixtures that had a small range of species. So here we're looking at the first original Cockle Park mix was ryegrass, a bit of cocksfoot, some timothy, and 3 legumes. So birdsfoot trefoil, flowering red clover, and wild white clover. As we progressed through time, they tinkered with that a little bit. There were a succession of mixtures. This one, the number 4, was designed for a dryer system. So we had no ryegrass, Meadowphasia, cocksfoot, timothy, white clover. So not particularly multi-species. And then here's an example a bit later on. Again, some cocksfoot, timothy, red clover, playing around with flowering dates, heading dates, different types of the ryegrass as well in terms of balancing the mixtures between tetraploid and diploid. And all those mixtures evolved over time, and areas developed their own specialties along those mixtures. So say, this is nothing new. A lot of things in agriculture reinvent themselves and come around again. Okay, now today we've moved on from those few grasses and a few legumes this is our selection pick and mix counter for multi-species leys today. And say I could probably add another dozen or so in here as well. So I've got a range of grasses. More recently, we've added in the Festulolium, so that's a cross between a fescue and a ryegrass. Most of the Festuloliums currently available on the market are a cross between an Italian and a fescue, so very much a silage type grass. Most of them are pretty much 95% Italian, so they will still head on every 6 or 7 weeks. We are developing modern varieties of Festulolium crossed with a perennial, so there are more grazing type. And as time goes on over the next few years, hopefully we'll see a few more of those in the system. Some of the mixtures that are designed very much at the sort of environmental end might include some of the things that I would call, a bit rude now, weed grasses. So my crested dogtails, my sweet vernal, those lower production grasses. A huge range of clovers, so we can add into there some of the hybrids as well. But yeah, red clover, white clover. The Bursfoot trefoil is one that a lot of people are particularly interested in. Very high in tannins, seen as a natural anthelmintic. Also, you know, it's a nice, pretty thing to have in your sward. The picture on the bottom left is full of Bursfoot trefoil. Herbs, the ones that you'll see in most mixtures will be the chicory and the plantain, possibly some yarrow. Frequently we're seeing a little bit of salad burnet and sheep's parsley. Some of these herbs are quite small seeds to start with and quite vulnerable plants, and they can get grazed out quite early on. And again, once we start getting into specialist mixtures, we might have some with some flowers in as well. The key ones there would be oxeye daisies and some of the self-heels and knapweeds. I was talking with Joshan from Oliver Seeds the other day, and he says a lot of these goodies are now in fairly short supply. My multi-species leys have become so popular that everybody wants a piece. So yeah, we might become a little bit limited on what's available in the years ahead. Or there might be a market for people to start producing seed for some of these more niche markets. Okay, so I've just picked, here's a couple, they both say herbal ley on the packet. Completely different mixtures. One is 90% grass and the other's just over 50% grass, with a lot more goodies in there and bits and pieces. These were 2 leys that went on to one of the Farmer Connect demo farms down in Moor Farm down in Pembrokeshire. And yeah, they are both being grazed by dairy cows, and they are both in quite high fertility situations. One of them, well, actually they both look the same now. There's a lot of ryegrass and a lot of chicory, and we've lost a lot of the goodies. But so yeah, they are 2 different mixtures. The one on the right will probably cost 7 or 8 quid more than the one on the left, because there's a lot more goodies in it. So yeah, there's a huge range of composition out there. Here's one I've got off a website. And again, we've got some Festulolium at 10%, 5% Timothy, some perennial ryegrass, metafescue, and then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 legumes. Sandfoin's a legume as well. And then I've got my chicory and a bit of plantain and some sheep's burnet. And the split with this, the ones before we were talking 80, 90% grasses. This one's got 40% grass, 30% legume, and 30% herb. But that is by weight. And if we start looking at how many seeds I've got in a kilo, there's a huge range. So if we look, a kilo of sandfoin, they're large seed. So I've got 57,000 seeds in a kilo. And once I get down to something like yarrow, tiny, tiny small seed, once I start putting my composition of yarrow up, I introduce a huge amount of seed. So let's put it in context. If I add an extra kilo an acre of Timothy to a seed mix, that adds an extra 5 million seeds per hectare, which works out an extra 500 seeds per metre squared. But if I put an extra kilo of sandfoin in there, I'm only actually adding 13, 14 seeds per square metre. So small little differences in how a seed mixture is put together can affect the balance of it in terms of what germinates and what dominates the sward. So we've got to be a little bit careful with some of these small seeds in terms of the numbers. All right, some nice modern research. back in the 60s, there's a guy that said, well, basically, if we look at when we establish a grassland ley, we oversupply the grass seed to dominate the seedbed and outcompete the weeds. But also, whatever we sow is competing against each other. And that after 2 months, I've probably only got about 20% of the seedlings that germinated and now survived. The other 80% have been outcompeted. And once we get a year old, I've probably got less than 10%. So there's this massive competition going on in a recent seedbed of a newly sown ley between the weeds, between what we've sown, and in terms of the different composition. And we've got some stuff in these multi-species leys that are very quick to germinate and become quite aggressive and dominant very quickly. And we've got other species that might take a little bit longer to germinate. Okay, example, I was on a farm yesterday up near Ruthin, and we've set up a little trial there with a chicory mix. And all we've done is add chicory into an existing, this is Oliver's broadsword mix, plus some chicory. And I've put 1 kilo of chicory in one. And I was counting plants yesterday, and we've got 60 chicory plants per square metre. And it's a nice balanced sward. It's probably a bit too much there, but they're on it. It's only a small field, they'll get through it. Next door, I've got a field with an extra kilo of chicory, and I'm now up to 150 plants per square metre. Now, the start it's had, hopefully, there is still grass in the base and we haven't outcompeted it. It needs to be grazed off fairly sharpish. But this is the change we have with small changes in composition between, very much a ley that's still got some grass in it and something that would take a foot in a wet time, whereas the one on the right with the chicory is a lot of bare ground underneath that, and it can muddy up in a wet time very quickly. Now, some of the multi-species leys are really simple. And I say all I've done with that broadsword mix is add in 1 kilo of chicory. And effectively this one from Germinal, we've got 4 ryegrasses, 3/4 of a kilo of chicory, the same with plantain, and 1 kilo of white clover. And that is very much about a production-based system. In high fertility situations, a lot of the little ones, if I put salad, burnet and yarrow in there, it would probably get out-competed very quickly. So the argument is, hang on, why put them in? Let's keep it nice and simple. And certainly in many high fertility situations, it will be a waste of time. Year 1, you might see a few. By year 2, they're gone. And okay, in this ley, if the chicory disappears in year 3, then I've still got a very much viable ryegrass clover ley underneath. So even though I've got a short-term element to it, I've still got what would effectively be a long-term ley underneath. Okay, so that's the simple end of a multi-species ley. Other mixtures, they might be designed to include phases. So we've got, the example here has got a range of legumes, including crimson clover, which is pictured on the left there, which is an annual, which has a lovely flower, attracts a lot of pollinators, looks really impressive, not a lot of it around year 2. So basically year 1, the red clover, the chicory, and all the annuals dominate. By the time I get through to year 3, it looks like the picture at the bottom right, whereas a lot of those have disappeared, and I've still got the plantain and the white clover and a lot of the grasses. So it's a progressive mix. And again, it will still persist year 4, year 5. But it's designed to go through these phases. Now, some of these species will be some of these mixtures will be designed to be cut. So here's one that's designed as a 3-4 year cutting ley, and it's got ryegrass, timothy, a big white clover, nice aggressive red clover and vetch. Sometimes you'll see lucerne in there, but certainly there's going to be less emphasis on things like the plantains, the chicories and some of the small herbs, because if you're putting it through a regular 6-week silage shut, you're going to outcompete those. So there's no point in putting them in, but it is still classed as a multi-species ley. Quite often some of these types of leys may also be used for mob stocking. So this is where we're allowing maybe 90 days between grazings. So we're going in at quite high sward covers. So this is one designed, Hull Seeds put one together for mob grazing. So these would be typical examples. I've got a Cotswold seed mix. If you want to go and have a look at a good range of seed mixtures, the Cotswold Seeds is a really good website. Some nice information on there. A lot of background too on multi-species leys. these tend to be really geared at short term. So they're quite simple mixtures, many of them, and they are designed to run 1, 2, maybe three seasons. Quite often used as a way of cleaning up a sward as well. So if I've got a weed issue, I can use them to outcompete them. The picture on the top right here is a bunch of calves in a worming paddock. This is courtesy of Tim Downs, and this picture was taken about 7 or 8 years ago. And I spoke to him today, and he's still every year putting more and more of his farm down to multi-species leys, having a huge impact. And okay, he's Shropshire on a bit drier country, but yeah, working really, really well. Okay, so that's one area of mixtures. Then we've got a whole range of mixtures that can either be designed for dry land or wetland. So obviously the one on the left for the wetter situations, the one on the right, we start putting cocksfoot, festuloliums, tetraploids, slightly more drought tolerant than diploids. So again, when we start looking and selecting mixtures, don't just pick one off the shelf that says, oh, multi-species ley. We need to think about what's in it and how it's going to suit your farm or your individual field situation. The other side of things in terms of the multi-species leys has been driven by some of the environmental schemes. So certainly in England, we now have what's called the GS4 scheme, where you have to include in your mix 5 grasses, 5 herbs, 3 legumes, one of which has to be bird's-foot trefoil. You will only not be allowed to put any fertiliser on this mix. And they're going to pay you £309 a hectare for establishing and maintaining this mix for a 5-year agreement, which to me sounds like a hell of a payment. But I say the requirements are quite tight. They expect those 13 species to be present throughout the 5 years. So if something gets outcompeted, you have to either re-establish the ley or try and oversow and introduce them. So it's not going to be an easy thing to achieve. Whether or not the Welsh schemes follow some of these ideas, we'll wait and see. But most of the seed companies you'll see have one of these GS4 compliant leys. This is the one from Oliver's. And I've actually put this into one of the demo farms up at Bala, Trewedog. We've just trialled this as a seed mix this year. Now, you would think that if this is a scheme and it's got 5 grasses, 5 herbs, 3 legumes, that every seed company would have something similar. Yeah, of course you'd assume. So I've got 2 GS4 seed mixtures, one from Barenberg, one from Hurrell's, and you can see the huge difference in composition. Both of them trying to achieve the same aim. So best of luck, folks. You pays your money, you takes your choice. And I say, you need to be making choices about how much ryegrass have we got in there? Is it going to dominate? Because if this goes into a high fertility situation where I've got a lot of grass, it could easily dominate and outcompete the little guys. So certainly the Barenberg one, I wouldn't want to put into a field with high P's and K's with a history of nitrogen use and expect to see some of the goodies left in year 3 and year 4. Okay, so this is the sward in its early stages at Trewedog. I can say this is this Oliver's GS4 mix, and as you can see, there's a whole range of goodies in there. Very much to the fore has been, in its early stages, have been the yarrow. We can just see that fragmented leaf there. 10 days ago, I did some species count. So it's been in the ground 5 or 6 weeks. Sorry, lots of numbers. All I've done is I've done lots of quadrats, 0.1 of a square metre, and we've counted plant numbers and then averaged them up. The column on the right is plants per square metre. Top of the list at the minute is yarrow, followed by the grasses. Then I've got some chicory that's established really well. The white clover has kicked in. I've got a bit of weed, but not a lot. And a lot of the time we find that because I've got so many seed going in with a lot of these multi-species leys, it does have a very good competition effect against the weeds. We did one in the drought of 2018, and in fact the chicory and the plantain actually acted as a sort of cover crop and protected everything else underneath in the drought. So they have a really good establishment phase as long as conditions are with them. I say we'll continue to monitor this ley and see how it develops, and they all are dynamic things. We might find that in some years one thing's dominate more than another. We might find that the sheep at Trewedog kind of have a penchant for chicory and I'll graze it out in the first year. We'll wait and see what happens. Okay, all I'll say is the choice of herbal leys out there is enormous. We need to think about when you're looking to put your herbal ley in, what are your targets? Is it very much a short-term ley that kind of acts as a break crop? Will be followed by a long-term ley afterwards? Is it something that you might be cutting on a regular basis? Do you have purely production targets? Is it just there to improve land finishing, or are you happy to include some wider environmental benefits as well? We need to think about the dry land, the wet land. We need to think about what you're grazing it with, and your grazing regimes. If you are tightly stocked and your sheep are grazing it through winter, you're not going to have many goodies left. So we need to think about how we manage it all the time. Now, all this variation gives me a lot of problems because I'm forever trying to look for data and research and science to back up what I do. And when I see information about herbal leys, multi-species leys, I haven't got a clue what we're dealing with because there is such a range on the market. And okay, these are the positives that we all talk about what can be achieved by multi-species leys. And all that information, yes, there is some science behind some of this. There's a lot of farm trials and an awful lot of anecdotal evidence. And that's building all the time. Because there's an awful lot of anecdotal and farm trials that talk about some of the negative sides of multi-species leys. The fact that some can be rather erratic in terms of yields. And a lot of that is down to how the species in that sward fluctuate over time. We can have a crashing clover. We can have a dominance of some of the aggressive species. Some would suggest some of them are poor responders to fertilizer, particularly in early season. Other people talk about some of the summer quality issues. But again, if you've got a lot of Festulolium maybe heading through that summer period, that might be the driver behind some of those negativities. Some of the utilization levels have been questioned at times. You know, the sheep leave an awful lot behind. They don't graze as well. The cattle tread an awful lot of it. We waste a lot. On a wet day, it will be low dry matter. So I've measured dry matters down at 7.5%, 8%. So physically, your sheep, your lambs cannot eat enough chicory on a wet day to achieve any sort of live weight gain. They'll probably go backwards because it's just too wet. They can't get enough gut fill on a high chicory content sward. Again, lack of persistence. Plenty of people say, oh, we put them in, didn't last. Now, my question behind that would be, well, how did you manage it? Because if you manage it wrong, it will disappear very quickly. The weed side of things, I've got nothing to spray my multi-species labour with. So if I've got a weed issue, it only gets worse. So certainly weeds, if we don't sort them out pre-establishment, we're in trouble. There's some questions about silage quality, but again, I can argue there are ways and means to get around that. We'll have a discussion on that maybe later. Some would challenge it's quite an open sward, so when it rains, it doesn't hold stock. My argument would be when it rains, don't put your stock on it. And other people say actually it's not, some of these species aren't particularly winter hardy. So all these negatives, yeah, we can find some negatives if we want to, but a lot of that will come down to individual situations. I say it makes it tricky trying to separate the science from some of the anecdotals. So the science itself, where do we start? I'm going to cheat, I'm afraid. There's currently a ton of really good work. If you want to check out the agroecology websites, and you've got a couple of hours to kill, there's a couple of really useful webinars that run through a lot of the current and recent science and some of the farm trials that they've got running down in Devon. There's a lot of collaboration going on between Rothamsted and places like Duchy College. So yeah, there's some science in there that you'll fall asleep to for briefly, but wake up, there's some really good bit in the middle as well. So I'm going to nick one of the slides from that presentation. So thanks to Bethan for doing all the hard work and doing literature research. So this lass has looked at 77 studies on, all right, herbal leys, so they could be all sorts of things. And on nearly 70% of them, they said, yeah, actually, we grew more grass on my herbal ley compared to my non-herbal ley. And on half of them, they had higher D values. Some of them had protein levels, not many. You know, we think, hang on, we've got all these extra clovers going in. Should we not, and chicories and plantains, should we not always have higher protein? Well, actually, in some of the studies, 29% said, actually, no, we didn't. So there's a whole ruck of information out there. And I say the starting point for many of these studies is always going to be different. But the positive one really does seem to be a lot about yields. You know, a lot of the time we find we grow more grass. So digging into the science, we grow more grass with multi-species leys. Big multi-European research project looked at, all right, we say multi-species leys, they had 4 species in their mixtures. And they did the old experiment of we grow 4 species on their own, and then we grow these 4 species in a mix, and the mix always outperforms the average of the individuals. And they did that across all the sites, every single site, the mixtures outperform the average in the monocultures. So as soon as I start getting these complementary growth curves, different rooting patterns, you get this synergy between species, and we increase our yield on average above the average of the individuals. I found a nice trial here looking at what I would term actually a proper multi-species. I've got a basic 3 mix, ryegrass, red and white clover, compared with a 10 species mix, which included some of the pretty stuff, the herbs, bursfoot trefoil. And then I've got a 12 mix where they put in fescue and lucerne. And this is a nice classic example of a scientist wanting a result. So looking at the graphs, there's not a heap of difference between a 3 mix and 10 mix. Oh, let's add 2 more. Yeah, and the 2 they chose to put in are my big guys, are my fescularium and my lucerne, which are going to really change yield because they're the big, aggressive, dominant ones. So yes, they have increased yield by cheating. No, that's rude. I'm a skeptic, aren't I? But in their low input system, without slurry, they did increase yields with the 10 species with the 12 species by over 10%. But where slurry was added, they didn't really achieve that. So once we get into a fertile situation, a lot of the goodies would be just being now competed by the ryegrass. Again, in the same study, they looked at differences in cutting regimes and grazing regimes, and we're talking very small differences in yields. So again, marginal in terms of, we certainly don't grow any less. You know, so are they higher? No, not really, but there's certainly no less. Okay, one of the other, I'm not going to go through all the research on all the areas, but one other I thought I'd just pull out from the science database. Herbal leys and fermenting properties. Okay, I'll start with local. Christina did some work in Aberystwyth, looking at fecal egg counts in lambs grazing bursfoot trefoil and chicory. I found that actually in chicory, there wasn't really an impact on fecal egg counts. But these guys were grazing like pure swards. So can I really extrapolate that into a multi-species sward where my chicory might be 10, 15% of the dry matter? Another study said, actually, I need to get to 70%. Now, in those pictures I showed you earlier where I've got 2 kilos of chicory in the mix, I'm not far off 70%. So even though that 2 kilos of chicory mix might not last 3 years, and it might muddy up at the base, might be a hell of a worm. We'll find out. We're going to do some work on the animal performance, but it might be the critical level of chicory that's required to have that impact. Another study here actually found a positive for chicory in terms of reducing worm burdens. So there is, again, a whole mixture of evidence out there, and it is another key area of research that's always ongoing, but certainly there is a threshold for how much chicory, bursfoot trefoil I need in a mix to have a positive effect. Okay, away from the animal side of things, once we start looking at soil, there's all these claims that multi-species leys increase soil carbon, and it's one of the drivers between them being in all these environmental schemes. So here's some early data from down in Rothamsted, and yes, I've got 3 farms, and they've monitored soil organic matter levels at 3 different soil depths, the surface, 10 to 30 and 30 to 50, and they've found increases over a very short term. And okay, even a small increase, 0.1, puts my carbon storage up by 9 tonne. And the big bonuses are the soil carbon at depth, because that's fairly well stored. That's going to be a genuine carbon build, whereas some of the stuff near shallower can easily break down and be released by subsequent cultivations. Because one argument is if my multi-species leys only last 3 or 4 years and I'm ploughing them out again, I'm going to release all that carbon. But if that is sequestered at depth, then that is a genuine carbon storage. Okay, persistency. Again, stealing data from the Rothamsted guys. We've got an experiment established in 2019 and then monitored through 2020 under 2 grazing regimes, either cell grazing or continuous grazing. And in both trials, we've looked at, hang on, we started with 7 or 8 species, and in the space of 12 months, we've gone down to 4. And if we looked at the combination of, hang on, is it grasses I'm losing? No, in most situations, they've lost maybe 1 grass species in some of the plots, and that will normally be things like the meadow fescue. The big losses come in the forbs. Those are our herbs, those are our broadleafs, and some of the legumes. So we've got this information about swards being managed in a fairly controlled environment, and yet they're losing species. And it does make me worry that some of these environmental schemes that say, oh, you have 13 species, we want you to keep them. I just can't see it happening. We know that in the competitive environment of multi-species lay, some things are going to lose out. So I do wish the policy guys would listen to the research guys, and we might have some sensible policies in place. Time for a moan, Chris. Yeah, right. Oh, I'm just going to chuck you another up-to-date statement. Let's go back, crikey, 90 years. They were playing around with the Cockle Park mixtures and looking at what outcompeted each other. And obviously top of the list were things like Italian ryegrass, perennial ryegrass, the really aggressive guys. And as we come down the list, the guys that really struggled were things like the meadow fescue and the timothy, easy to lose. They were playing around with chicory, okay, not the modern varieties we have now, but certainly they were saying it's not quite as aggressive. One thing that this guy did say was we did all these mixtures with different things in, but under a similar treatment, everything eventually turns into pretty much the same. And this is what we've got to think about, is when we're establishing our multi-species lays, if we just treat them like we treat everything else on the farm, is all they're going to do is end up as a ryegrass, and a bit of meadowgrass, and the odd bit of clover, and the odd bit of dock. If we're not careful, everything ultimately returns to, you know, the farm standard. Okay, that's me done on science. Multi-species lays, hugely variable, as are my establishment conditions and my soil type and my climate and my grazing regimes, and it gives me multiple outcomes. And so, to be honest, I'm not really sure that all this science tells me a lot at the minute, because there is just such variety out there in terms of what's going on. There are a few things we can start picking, certainly the yield side of things, some of the quality issues, but at the minute I've got multi-species lays giving me multiple outcomes. Okay, that's my sciencey bit over. Okay, we're rattling on for time. I'm going to speed up now. I just want to run through a few of the projects we're doing with Farming Connect. I've been involved briefly with the More Farm, looking at multi-species lays in dairy context. And now we've got a couple of farms, Porfeydd in Bala, looking at multi-species. And this is the all singing, all dancing, complicated one. I've just put in a simpler one on the same farm as well. Basically trying to reduce creep feed for early season lambs. And then I've got a farm up in Riffin where we've put in these chicory lays. In addition to that, there's 4 projects running on the Innovation Project Scheme, European Innovation Wales. I'm involved with the alternative forages in marginal land and Mr. Yeomans and his sustainable intensification, basically introducing high timothy content swards. There's another couple of projects also running as well. So there's going to be an awful lot of information from those projects over the next 2 or 3 years. So look out for those coming through. The EIP project in Wales is the one I've been working with for the last 2.5 years. 2018, we established multi-species lays up in the world, you know, fairly high, challenging, high rainfall, shallow soils, and we've been looking at animal performance and sward performance. These are the mixtures I put in, thanks to Helen from Germinal for designing them for me. So my multi-species lays isn't 2 multi-species. I've got plantain and chicory, a couple of clovers, meadow fescue, timothy, fescue against a control lay as a standard HSG3 type. So ryegrass, bit of timothy, bit of clover. And these are our early results. When in 2018, so 2019 was my first full year of monitoring. On one farm, I grew 30% more forage on the multi-species lays. On another farm, Gilvac, it was slightly less. And on the third farm, we actually grew less for the multi-species lay. But overall, between the 3, we topped up by about 7% extra yield. This year, there's only one farm continued to outperform control with multi-species ley. The other two have stepped back a bit. But again, you look at these sort of yields. Gedli he had 18 units of nitrogen when on that last year, grew 12.5 tonne. So I had questions about how much grass can I grow in a fairly low input system because of the high amount of clover we've got. He's growing 12 tonne. A lot of the benefits in terms of yield were in seasonality. So all the farms showed higher forage growth in early season and late season. We had a bit of a dip in the summer on a couple of farms, but all of them showed higher performance. So that's valuable spring grass to most sheep farms. We didn't actually repeat that this year. The dry spring of 2020, things stuttered a little bit, and we didn't see those differences. Again, all this will be reported in the next 6 or 8 months. We'll get it all written up. But yeah, 3 farms with the same mix with 3 different results. The one farm, it's been sheep grazed cut once a year, and it's had regular fertilizer. We kept the plantain, most of the chicory's gone, certainly the red clover's gone. The festulolium's quite prominent, and that's how it looks now. Bizarrely, if you looked at it in April, as my multi-species ley, it was very slow to get going this year, and as such, the weeds kind of came in, but they got outcompeted once fertilizer went on. Multi-species ley bounced up and outcompeted some of the weed problem. Just over the hill, Gedli, again, hardly any nitrogen, lots of clover, a mix of cattle and sheep grazing. The clover has really dominated. I'm now counting 5 or 6 plants per quadrat. So yeah, I'm only up at 40 plants per square metre. We started off at about 130 for the plantain and the chicory. The third farm, a hell of a wetter site. All the goodies have disappeared, really. I'm left with a lot of festulolium, quite a bit of ryegrass, and then I've got weeds starting to come in. Phil's been grazing with cattle behind a wire at times, and I think a lot of the high covers haven't helped keep the goodies in place either. Okay, I've got no consistent trends in forage quality. We keep measuring and analysing proteins, energies, and trace elements, and all 3 farms give me different answers. I'm getting no consistent trend. We've done some animal work, and we got a slightly improved lamb performance. The trouble we were finding was that lambs were only on their plots for 10, 15 days, and there's quite an acclimatization period when all the lambs walk around the field going, not eating that, I'm going to eat the hedge. The longer they're on there, the greater the range we get in terms of improvement. So this year we're going to try and run them on a sort of 4 or 5 week period, so that they get smaller allocations and we can block graze them across the field, just to keep them on there for a longer period and look at animal performance. Key lessons: if you're going to put a multi-species ley, don't do it this week, please. There's a lot of little seed that I need quite a big plant going into winter. I would always say the earlier we do it in the season, the better. It gives me, all right, a higher weed challenge early in the season than autumn, but I think with a grazing animal, we can deal with a lot of it. In many ways, I'd love to put my multi-species leys in after a clearing crop, stubble turnips, so that I get a nice, relatively clean seed bed to go into. Be careful, some of these small seeds, they can go deep very easily. I'm not a big fan of drilling. I would rather broadcast and roll it, and roll it, and roll it, please. So weed control pre-sowing, definitely. Don't muck about with the chemistry. If it's, if I'm fussy about grass, I need to be really, really fussy about my legumes. So pHs have got to be 6.2, 6.3, please. Doesn't work. If I graze it over winter, my goodies disappear. Oh, sorry, Jack. I've just put in a nice picture of what happens if you don't roll. Okay, my small seeds have got so little ectoplasm. If I give them any drought stress, they die. So all I can see here is the wheel marks where we had a bit of moisture. So please roll your seed beds, especially your multi-species. Rotational grazing, it doesn't work if I leave my animals to just hammer my swards. They will cherry pick, they will eat out all the goodies. Ideally, I want a rotational round somewhere around 25, 30 days. It will depend. The more grass I've got in there, the shorter my round's going to be, because I need to stop that grass out competing everything else. Easy to say, don't overgraze it, don't undergraze it. I'm not fairly dissimilar to what I would recommend for a conventional dairy system. As in, don't let it go over 3,000, try not to graze it below 1,400. One of the problems I've got with multi-species swards, my plate meter doesn't work particularly well. So a lot of the time I'm doing quadrat cuts. We can recalibrate plate meters, but certainly be careful. We recognise from the project that unless my chicory or plate is there at 10, 15, 20%, it doesn't do an awful lot to affect animal performance. I need to have a certain level in there to be a driver. Cutting doesn't seem to have done it any harm at all. We have pressured him not to cut too low, but beyond that, as long as it's only a 5-6 week shut, it seems to be doing the chicory and plantain no harm at all. The boys at Blackmill have certainly benefited from the Festulolium in terms of spring growth. I think that's been one of the biggest drivers of that seasonal benefit has been Festulolium. There's an example of a residual which I say is fractionally too high. All right, it's first time round. It did turn, hopefully we'll clear that up next time, but that's a residual of somewhere about 2,100. It'd be nice if it was a little bit tighter. I'll say what I don't want to do is start grazing out the base of these chicory plants too much, but he has left a bit behind there. But I know why. He wanted to get next door because he's getting away. Okay, how are we doing for time? Have I ever run yet, Alan? Yes. Okay, good luck. Getting the right mixture is not easy. There is so much choice out there. You need to make those decisions about what you want to do with it, what are the pressures on it from fertility, from grazing animals, and make those choices about the balance of grass and what goodies you put in to go with it. You'll certainly might need to change your management, or else you will find that the chicory and the plantain and the herbs vanish very, very quickly. I get fussy about establishment conditions, about conventional leys. With my multi-species leys, you've really got to be on the ball. A really well-worked seedbed, I always encourage, cultivate, get a nice consolidated seedbed and look after it early season. Get and graze it, encourage that tillering, look after it. There is evidence out there that says, we can grow more yield, we can get quality benefits, we can get seasonality benefits, but I would certainly say it's not a given at every site. There are some places that just will not suit a multi-species ley. If I want to see animal performance, then it needs to be more than just a few chicory plants. And I would say make the most of years 1 and 2, because chances are your chicory and plantain ain't going to be there in a heap in year 3 and year 4. All the soil side of things, there's a heap of evidence coming that they are very positive. And I would say, for all of you, there are definite opportunities to improve the forage quality and some of those yield parameters using multi-species leys. The caveat to all this is your farm is one big bloody experiment. Go and play. You might, if you're doing a multi-species mix, try a couple. See which ones work, and it is a learning process. And most of the guys that started off with multi-species leys 10 or 15 years ago have tinkered around and have dropped species and added species till they find something that suits the system. Okay, thank you for this whistle-stop tour of multi-species leys. Alan, we're open to questions.
Yeah, ideal. Thank you very much, Chris. Very interesting and a lot of information and a lot of different things to think about. So we had a couple of questions coming in the middle. So I said that wait till the end, till before I started any questions really. Gwen said, she put her hand up in the middle and said, I think this was about the seeds mixtures in the middle. So the display still seems to be that of many people have produced wet and dry seed mixes.
I said the biggest difference in the wet and dry tends to be the balance between the Timothy and the Cocksfoot, and the inclusion of things like you might have slightly higher rates of chicory, you might have slightly higher rates of the tetraploid grasses. So those are the normal trade-offs, and we tend to lose a little bit of the Timothy. There's no huge rocket science between it. They just tend to go for slightly more of the deeper rooting stuff in the dry mixtures.
Ideal. Richard Wilding's asked, I think we've answered this in the end, really, in the middle, really. Are there any issues with selective grazing or some of these plants not palatable to sheep? In this case, rotational grazing to hammer it in a short space of time.
Yeah, it's very much a case of if you're trying to do, like the book says, I'm going to graze it for 3 days and before I move them on, you might find after 2 days they haven't touched it. They've eaten all the grass and they've looked at the chicory. So there is definitely an acclimatization period before everything gets going. So I quite often that sort of first grazing round, you might have to leave them and let them hammer a small part of the field till they get used to it. Make sure the fences are good. Make sure your ticker box works. And make them eat it, because certainly the other thing that can affect palatability, if your chicory is under any sort of stress, it will be even more bitter than it normally is. So as soon as I put it in a field that's either slightly wet or the pH isn't quite right or the phosphates are deficient, your chicory is quite a bitter plant and your animals might struggle to eat it.
Any solutions for thistles in the sward?
We've got the option of weed wipe as a possibility. That's all I've got. I've got no spray out there that can take things like creeping thistle out. Topping is just cosmetic. So yeah, if we've got serious infestation, then it might be time to say, well, okay, my multi-species lay is done 3 years. I've probably missed the best of it anyway, so let's take it out and start again. And for many multi-species lays, I don't see them being a permanent feature on a farm. I think there might be something that is part of a rotation and moves around the farm. I say typically it might be stubble turnips into a multi-species lay and then into a permanent lay.
We have one, someone saying you haven't mentioned overseeding. Is this possible with to overseed herbal lays into or lays?
I watch this space. I'm just about to do one this weekend against, we've been delaying because of the weather conditions. We bought the seed, we'll probably have a go. We'll try and get some plantain stitched in. The danger with oversowing is in a drill is putting it too deep. And it's such a small seed, it can easily get outcompeted. The chicory's quite up and at it. Plantain's not too bad. We're going to have a go. Other people anecdotally have achieved it. With any oversowing, whichever God you believe in, you pray to. It's so dependent on soil conditions and rainfall, soil temperatures, slugs, you name it. There's a million things up against you. But again, there's no reason why not. As long as I've got, a fairly tightly grazed sward that isn't too aggressive and competitive that I can then stitch into. Have a go.
Great. David asking, was meant to drill ryegrass, clover, chicory and plantain. Sprayed field off quite a few weeks ago. It's been too wet and weeds, etc. are starting to grow. What would you recommend now as season is coming to the end?
It's really touch and go. I say that the farm down the road, part of me wants to say we'll do it next year. We've still got opportunities to safely put in things like Westerwolds, Italians, so that we can guarantee that we've got ground cover and I've got grub in front of them. If I put something that's relatively slow to establish in the ground now, I might have nothing in the ground at all and be tiptoeing around it. So I think it's one of those, if you can afford to have a field that's out of production and you're going to really have to tiptoe around over winter, then maybe I've still got an opportunity. Again, depends where you are. Derek said that we had summer in Wrexham today. We had bloody February in Ysbyty Ysmith, I'll tell you that much. So, it depends where you are, soil conditions. I start getting twitchy in September, I must admit, about seeding some of these multi-species lays, yeah.
Okay. Hugh Jones saying, herbal lay direct drilled after winter barley now coming well. What's the best management through autumn into winter or tack sheep?
Okay, all we've got to do is try and, protect my goodies. So I don't want to graze my chicory to the floor. Ideally, I want to keep my sheep moving. And ideally, I want to give it a good 60-day break. I don't want to nail that. At the minute, I'm looking at grazing every 25, 30 days. As we go into October, that's going to come out 40, 45. And certainly over winter, it's going to be 60 plus. We just need to look after those small plants. Ryegrass is great because it tillers and it spreads. Your chicory doesn't. It's got one growing point. You damage it, it's gone. It's really easy to damage. So we need to be careful. Keep them moving is my answer.
Thank you. David Owen's asking, what's the impact on the quality of silage made on such lays? And he's asking particularly on organic and sheep farm. I think we've had one on the dairy farm as well. asking about quality of silage really.
Okay, hands up. My experience has been twice, and so far we've had no impact, no negative impact on silage quality. We had a fraction, about 1% increase in protein by including multi-species ley. But I say it will depend on the quantity of chicory and plantain, etc., that you've got in there. So if it's a picture like I showed with masses of chicory, it's going to give you trouble because there's not a lot of sugar in it, and it's very low dry matter, so it doesn't ferment particularly well. So it's a balance on, really is a horrible answer to give you, but it depends on the sward itself and what's in there. You know, if there's lots of the real wet stuff, the plantains and the chicories, you might struggle a little bit. There's some work done, those webinars I was pointing you towards from Rothamsted. There's a little section in there on silage and the use of additives. And again, they had no real issues with quality.
Okay.
Again, watch cutting heights, don't scalp it. You know, I need a good 3-inch cutting height.
Okay. Would you agree that multi-species swords can still be justified even if they produce less because they are a low-cost system and reduce artificial nitrogen use, which is detrimental to the environment?
Yeah, it's not about yield, it's about utilisation, and it's about cost of kilo per dry matter. So yeah, if I can produce a low-cost kilo of dry matter and only grow 9 tonne, it's better than chasing high yields with lots of fertiliser. So yeah, I'm all for if we can just tick along and grow 8-9 tonne. You know, if I can get utilisation on the project farms, we were up at 75% utilisation. Then you know that's our target. So yeah, we can produce very cheap, high quality forage from these multi-species leys with very little input.
Okay. I think there's a bit of a crossover from the overseeding question now as well. But I think asking any thoughts about overseeding as opposed to ploughing. So yes, thinking trying to avoid the plough to help the carbon sequestration. So
yeah, I'd say hopefully a lot of that carbon is below plough depth. But certainly talking to Tim Downs, organic farmer over in Shropshire, he's very much in favour of trying to stitch in at the top and avoid the plough as much as he can. You know, in many situations, a good seedbed and a bit of soil cover and keeping the moisture in, there's no better way to do that than with a plough. But by all means, I can't see any problem with minimal tillage and in the right conditions, maybe oversowing. Most of the time I come back to the ploughing, but I'm only shallow ploughing, you know, I'm only going 5 or 6 inches.
Yeah, and I suppose those help the any compaction issues as well, I suppose, don't they?
Well, this is it again, you know, if we can try and avoid, you know, rectify those sort of damages. And again, if I've got a real thick old mat of a sward, there's nothing I can really do other than break that up with a plough.
Next question, can high protein in grass analysis be too high for lamb weight gain? Had a lot of samples, 22 to 25% crude protein.
Yeah, I mean, invariably it's not necessarily the crude protein, it's the quality of that protein as well. Certainly, quite often you'll see that as, you know, in terms of shitty arse lambs and a lack of performance. You know, one of the classics of having red clover where we frequently see proteins of 23, 24, 25 is the quality of that protein combined with the fibre means that we don't get that passage through the system. So as long as the passage of that high protein forage is matched with a high energy level and a fairly slow passage through the gut, then you'll utilise it. If it's wet grass and wet, mushy chicory that's rattling through, then maybe not.
I think David again, I think something back towards the tillering as well. For info, what he's found. I found that ploughing followed by rolling and chaining, i.e. no power harrow, and sowing brassica into the cleared creeping thistle, but cleared creeping thistle quite well before ploughing and harrowing the following spring.
Yeah, certainly if I can avoid sprays, great. If I can put something in there that's aggressive and competitive, then it'll give us half a chance of getting on top of some of that thistle. Not an easy weed to even spray. You know, a lot of the time we are talking about several hits at it. So anything we can do through competition or mechanical activity that will help control it, great. Yeah.
I think Owen put his hand up before. I'll just give him a chance to see if he wants to put it up again. I could ask him to ask his question, but if he maybe it's been answered anyway. But yeah, I think I've got one more about a dairy farm, looking at a rotation length. Around what length are we looking at on a herbal lay, or is it tough to say?
Again, sorry to repeat my comments again. It depends exactly what's in your herbal lay. The more grass, the closer we can get to that traditional sort of 20-day dairy rotation through the summer. Once I start getting more and more chicory in it, it needs that recovery time. And we're probably going out towards 24, 25 days. I don't want to be really going into covers, above 3.2, 3.4 with a lot of material, because I start shading out stuff at the base. And I need some of that grass to tiller in the base. If I start losing that, we're in trouble. The good thing about the extended rotation lengths is your chicory and the like don't lose quality in the same way that your ryegrass does. So when you go into high ryegrass covers, you'll have a lot of dead material in the base and you get a lot of wastage. With the multi-species lays, you tend not to have that level of dead material. So we can extend them out a little bit.
Ideal. We don't think I've got any more questions at the moment, unless anybody else has got a question quite quickly now. But if they do, if you have any more questions, then you could send it over to us.
Email me over and I'll ignore them for a week. No, I won't. I'll answer them straight away.
Great. So I think that's it, really. I'd like to thank you very much, Chris.
Pleasure.
Yeah, it's been very interesting, and thanks for answering all the questions as well.